To close out the conference. It's been so fun here. I'm actually here with my mom and my brothers. I was able to bring the fam along, which is awesome. Yeah. All right, so I spend a lot of time in prison. I spent time in a number of prisons, but I spend most of my time in San Quentin State Prison in California. San Quentin is the oldest prison in California. It is currently significantly over capacity and houses over 4,200 incarcerated men, many of whom are serving life sentences. 800 of those men are on death row, making San Quentin the largest death row in the Western Hemisphere. I'm in San Quentin every week to work with incarcerated men on audio and video storytelling projects in their media center, and also to teach Python through a program called The Last Mile. The media center is an incredible place. The first ever Society of Professional Journalists inside a prison was established there in that media center in San Quentin. This is San Quentin newspaper is written. This is a monthly publication distributed to 30,000 people in every prison in California, in the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. It's a very special place. And then The Last Mile is a program to prepare incarcerated individuals for successful re-entry through business and technology training. The Last Mile has a sub-program called Code 7370, which was started in 2014. That's still pretty new. And that is the first ever programming curriculum inside of a United States prison. So in Code 7370, students learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript. They also learn Python. There is no internet access in these programs, so everything is done through thumb drives and PDFs. So imagine how you learned how to program. Imagine not having internet access. It's not easy. And a big part of these programs, like the Society of Professional Journalists and like The Last Mile, is bringing in people from outside as volunteers, as mentors, and to speak about their industry. And that's how I first ended up in San Quentin. One Sunday, I was sitting in a circle with maybe a dozen people in the media center, leading a discussion about technology. This visit was an open-ended conversation between the incarcerated men in these programs and me as someone with a background in technology and entrepreneurship, who's also deeply interested in the use of technology in the criminal justice system. It was supposed to be a 2-hour conversation. We went way over time because it was such a rich discussion. I didn't want to leave. They didn't want to leave. So we talked about everything. We talked about access to technology. We talked about the demographics of software engineering. We talked about the use of artificial intelligence in predictive policing and bail and sentencing and parole decisions, all of which happen today in the carceral state in the United States, which is a little scary. Towards the end of this conversation, one of the participants asked me, why do you care about this stuff? Because most people don't care. Right? Most people don't think about what's happening to the 2.2 million people in prison or jail in the United States. And that's by design. We build these prisons and jails far away from where people live so that you can forget about them. But so this person asked me, you seem to have a very clear vision about how you as a technologist want to be engaging with the criminal justice system. Like, how did that come to be? And I answered that question in that room, but I would like to re-answer this question here with you all today, because programming, and really the Python community, and open source principles are a big part of the answer. So I think it's worth talking about this specifically with you all, with this group of people. So that's a prelude to what we're going to talk about for the rest of this talk. Hi, my name is Jessica Mckellar. I've spent a huge portion of my adult life in the Python community, where my particular passion is teaching people how to program. When I lived in Boston, I live in San Francisco now. When I lived in Boston, I helped build the Boston Python user group into the largest Python user group in the world. I was a director for the Python Software Foundation. I've been the diversity chair for PyCon North America for half a decade. I have Intro to Python videos that have about 1 million views on YouTube. Right now, I'm a founder and the CTO at a company called Pilot. Every company that I've ever worked for has used Python as its tech stack. So I say all this to say that I care a lot about the Python community and like what we are able to do together. But I have a secret to share with you all, which is that it was never actually about Python. It was never about Python. I love this community. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. But it was never about Python. It has always been about systems. And what do I mean by that? Learning how to program is a profound experience. Who learned how to program recently, like maybe in the last 2 years? Anybody in this room, yes, awesome. Learning how to program is a profound experience because programming changes the way that you think about and debug and interact with the world. When you learn how to program, you learn a set of rules. You become fluent in those rules. You become a systematic debugger within those rules. You work with other people to break down and solve problems, to build software, to build libraries, to change the language and the ecosystem to make it better. When you learn how to program, you learn the rules, and then you learn that you can change your environment, like that you can change the rules. And when you learn how to program, you have this opportunity to experience mastering a system that you know that you can change. And actually, it's like worth dwelling on what I even mean by that, or like where that comes from. Because I think we can take for granted in the Python community, or as folks who are deeply embedded in open source, that this is even a concept. Like this comes from the tenets of free software, that they're what have imbued this community with a sense that this is possible. So let's remember what that even means. So the tenets of free software include the freedom to run software as you want to, for whatever reason you want to. You can study how the programs work, and you can change them to make them better, to fit your needs better. You can redistribute the software so that your neighbors can benefit. And you can distribute your own modifications to other people so they can benefit from them too. You know, the tenets of free software are so baked into and integral to open source communities today that we can take for granted what a powerful collective mindset that is. Like, who else thinks about the world that way? And when we take it for granted, we can sometimes forget to challenge ourselves to carry this powerful mindset into our lives outside of open source. So programming has rules, but you can change the rules, open a pull request, comment on that bug report. But really, almost everything is a system with rules that we all have the power to change. And there are software systems, there are people systems, there are hardware systems. You know, I think the most important systems are people systems. I think they're the hardest, at the very least. And you see, I got you guys there. Yeah, I got you guys there. And so, I mean, this is why I teach people how to program. It's not, I mean, I love Python, but it's not because I love Python, because I want more people in the world to know Python specifically. Like, this is why I invest so much of my time and my life into enabling other people to learn how to program in school, in prison, as kids, as adults. It's because of this. It's because programming changes the way that you think about and debug and interact with the world. And if, you know, when you've done it before in this programming context, maybe you, well, thoughts? Okay. Okay, so programmers master a system they know they can change, and when you've done it once, you know that you can do it again, maybe even in other contexts. And we need as many people as possible on the planet who believe that about themselves. And the reality is that very rarely do we have the luxury or the comfort, frankly, of the explicit permission that free software gives us. No one's ever going to invite us to change the hard people systems. Nobody's going to tell us what the rules are. No one's going to tell us how to participate. Nobody's going to remind us that we have the power to debug the system and deconstruct it and change it and make it better. But that doesn't change the fact that we have that power. So we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we have the power. We should have the confidence to use it, and we shouldn't forget to share it, and we shouldn't waste it. So this takes me back to San Quentin. Okay, I was in San Quentin because 12 years ago, I learned how to program, and I learned how to contribute to open source software. I became a part of the Python community, and I saw the scale of change that was possible through people working together to make software and a software community better. In short, becoming a programmer made me an activist. And now I apply that activist mindset not just to software systems, but to changing big people systems. And my particular passion these days is the criminal justice system in the United States. But there are a lot of other worthwhile systems to be tackling. So that's why I'm in San Quentin every week. And it's also why I'm passionate about getting in front of as many rooms full of people like you all as possible and saying this out loud, to make the case for the programmer's mind as an activist mind, and to call people to action. So as we close out PyCon Colombia today, my humble request of everyone in this room, everyone in this audience, is to remember your programmer's mind and to use it. So I would invite the question, what people system are you working on changing? And if you've already got one, that's awesome. I want to hear all about it after this talk. I would encourage you to take that passion and inspire somebody else to get involved as well. And if you don't have a people system that you're working on changing yet, that's totally great, but I want to encourage you to find one. Like, today is the day. What better day than today? What better day than coming out of a weekend full of participating in a community like we're doing today, this weekend with PyCon Colombia. And your thing doesn't have to be criminal justice reform, but if you're curious about it and you're not sure how to get started, this is what I say to people in the United States about ways that they can contribute to the system in the US. As individuals, as employers, and as programmers, to make our system more just and equitable. And I recognize I'm not an expert on Colombia's criminal justice system, but to use this as an example of a way that someone with a programming background can start to participate in a system like this. Here are some examples. So as individuals, this photo is on my mom's fridge at home. So as individuals, table stakes is being engaged on the political topics that affect our system. This means things like voting, and it means, specifically in the United States, that a function that has a lot of power is our district attorneys. They decide how and what to prosecute, and most people don't know about them and don't care about them and don't pay attention and vote in their local district attorney elections. So the first thing I say to anybody, a programmer or not, is vote in your be informed and vote in your district attorney elections and get other people to do the same. And then volunteering. So I teach Python in San Quentin every week through the last mile. I also support transitional housing for people who are recently released from prison, and I do practice interviews for people who are recently released as they prepare to apply for jobs. But there are a ton of volunteer opportunities in local prisons, jails, juvenile facilities. Unfortunately, in the US, we're really good at locking up kids too. Or post-reentry job training or support programs. These can be technical, these can be non-technical. There are a ton of opportunities, and there's more need than there are people volunteering to meet that need. So as individuals, whether or not you have a technical background, these are all possibilities on the table. And then as employers, a question that I ask people is, especially technologists, is how does your company think about people with records? Does your company conduct background checks? What do they do with those background checks? What decisions are they making? And is that the model or the philosophy that it should be using when it thinks about employment? My company, Pilot, actively works with San Quentin to hire people who are formerly incarcerated into a variety of roles, including our bookkeeping, customer support, and actually software engineering. So at Pilot, we've made the explicit sort of values and philosophical decision that having a criminal record doesn't prevent you from applying for or getting a job with us. And I want to encourage more companies to at least consider that value as well. And tech companies are powerful. We're powerful as employers. We have good jobs. There are a lot of us. We can and should throw our weight around for causes that bring more justice into the world. And then there's specifically as programmers. So this is very much on the cutting edge in the United States, but there now is the possibility of teaching programming in prisons through programs like The Last Mile. After prison, there are the same ways that people coming from a non-traditional software engineering background, the same mechanisms that exist to have allow people to transition into software engineering as a profession, things like coding boot camps, also benefit people with the non-traditional background of having been incarcerated. So supporting those types of infrastructure for job training and getting good jobs coming out of prison, that helps not just folks who are inside, but also other people who are interested in pursuing software engineering as a career. And then a really interesting one, at least in the United States, is the data that we should be using to do new research and to pass to write and pass legislation, to enact new policies. The data doesn't exist. So we wish we knew things like how many people are in jail right now. There's no such thing as clean data on a bunch of the basic properties of prisons, jails, juvenile facilities, who is in them, who is the treatment, is the sentencing, is the treatment equitable, who is entering and re-entering the system. We actually don't have clean, comprehensive data. And this is a real opportunity for especially people in this room, people who understand the tools and values of open source, to partner with experts on these systems, academics, researchers, and policymakers, to make that data available. As an example of this, I'm working with a professor at Fordham University in the United States to sort of gather data, a data set that has never existed before, which is data on who is booked into county jails and who is released as a daily snapshot. And what this requires is scraping jail websites from about 3,200 jails, about one for every county in the United States. This is like a web scraping problem. It's like an Amazon Lambda function that's backed by, it's like all the usual infrastructure. There's a database that I write stuff to. It's a bunch of gross web scraping code, but this is our bread and butter. And the idea that this data set has never existed before, because it's a little bit too much data for a bunch of grad students to gather manually, right? So it takes people who know how to program and who know how to get data and share it to liberate this data and have it out in the world to make policy decisions on. But today, at least in the United States, the intersection of people who know how to program and people who care about criminal justice reform is almost disjoint. And that's how this data set has failed to exist until basically this year. So as an example to say that there's a lot of expertise in this room, in the rooms across every Python meetup and every PyCon around the world, that would make data available, that would change the way that we legislate around our criminal justice system, if only people could get together and get galvanized to do these things together. So as programmers, we can use our superpowers to teach more people how to program, or we can liberate the data that needs to exist to make good decisions. Those are two of sort of many opportunities to engage with our specific backgrounds with this topic. So those are some recommendations that I make for programmers in the United States, at least, for how to get involved with our prison system, with our criminal justice system, as an individual, as part of an employer, and specifically as programmers. And as I mentioned, Colombia's criminal justice system is different. It's operating in a different context from the United States. But I hope that so this example of programmers working together to change a people system is still an engaging example of the programmer's mind as an activist mind. If you want to learn more about the organizations that I've mentioned in this talk, the San Quentin News has a website that's maintained by external volunteers, because there's no internet access inside, where you can read back issues, and you can see what it looks like for a large publication that is entirely driven by the people who are currently experiencing the system themselves. If you're curious about what it looks like to bring programming programs to prisons, you can learn more about the last mile and how that works on their website. And then I want to leave you with this picture. So the two people in the middle of this photo are some of the most important people in my life. So Shah on the left is my best friend, is a very talented videographer. Emil on the right works with me at Pilot. He does bookkeeping at Pilot. This is a photo of him when he was inside, and this is him now. He looks better now. He doesn't have to wear the blue. They both had life sentences, which were commuted by the governor of California, and they both got out of prison less than 6 months ago. And they are no longer in prison because of, in addition to significant efforts on their parts, 2 decades of large and small actions by people working to make the United States criminal justice system more just. And honestly, it's like people like you and me, who voted, who called their assembly members, who cared and made their voices heard, and contributed in the ways that made sense for their backgrounds. So when you're working on your people systems, which we're all going to do coming out of today, don't worry about starting small. Don't worry about feeling like the actions are incremental, because I promise that when those actions affect people that you care about, they feel really big. You can hear Shah and Emil tell their stories directly on a podcast called Life of the Law. And there's an episode that I really, really love called Traditions, where they talk about traditions as children, traditions before they were incarcerated, and then traditions inside. It's a really powerful piece. I would really love for you to be able to hear from them directly. And so, as we close out PyCon Colombia 2019 together, I love what John said in his opening remarks for this conference about PyCon Colombia being more than just a Python conference. I think we're on the same wavelength about today. That this is really a part of changing the way that people internationally think about this country, about its engineering talent, about its open source communities, about its tech industry. John and the rest of the PyCon organizing team saw a system that needed changing, and they are changing it. Great example. So let us continue that change as we depart this conference together. Let's embrace our programmer's mind as an activist mind. And I look forward to us all coming together for PyCon Colombia 2020 and reflecting on the systems that we've changed together in the intervening year. So thank you.
Thank you, Jessica, for your presentation. Now we'll open the round of Q&A, so raise your hands. And please stand up when you're making the question.
Thank you. Well, Jessica, it's really amazing what you're doing. And I would like to ask you, during your entrepreneur life and these altruist projects, what are the 3 harder challenges that you have been facing between these 2 worlds, or I don't know?
Okay, so maybe 3 or some challenges in engaging this type of work. To give a sort of a brutally honest answer, at least in the United States, a challenge is that in general, software engineers are really they're well off, they're well paid, they exist in a community that has a lot of privilege, and some of these topics can feel very far apart from the lives that they experience. So having the sense of empathy and urgency for what is going on with people who are less privileged can take some work sometimes. And I don't mean that as shade. I mean, like, my husband is a software engineer. Like, many of my best friends are software engineers. But not allowing us to be sedentary in our activism because our lives are good is a thing that I spend a lot of time thinking about. So that's one thing. There are other more tactical things. Like the data problem in the US is wild. It's like the United States is 50 states that each are made up of a bunch of counties, and a lot of the stuff around prisons and jails is at the county level. So when you're dealing with like 50 states that all have different policies and practices, and the counties that all have their own data and its own formats, getting good data sets together is difficult, and that's why the state of the art is so bad today. And then there's an interesting gender component to this. So most people incarcerated in the United States are men. Men get most of the attention because of in terms of absolute numbers and as a percentage, the bulk of the people who are incarcerated. The incarceration rate for women, the rate has gone up. And the reasons for women being incarcerated tend to look pretty different from men, and that's something that I think not enough people pay attention to. Those are a couple of answers. I could also spend the rest of my life talking about that. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Hi. First of all, thanks for the presentation. Very motivating. I like the idea of teaching programming to contribute to the system or mind of the person to make people better.
Yeah.
In that regard, how to deal with resistance when the person refuses to be dogged for personal reasons, because that's not my thing. I don't care, but your intentions are good actually. Mm-hmm. But how to deal with that resistance?
This is not in a prison context. It's like in general, trying to teach someone how to program who doesn't want to. Is that the question?
Well, no. I ask specifically for programming because some people might find it too difficult or mm-hmm. doesn't want to enter in this series of steps of thinking what you're doing, the effects of what you are doing, and, mm-hmm. and the results you are expecting. That's what I like the idea of teaching programming. But I think it's normal to find people with resistance to that part.
Totally. Well, so the folks who I work with is all opt-in. Nobody's being required to do this who doesn't want to. So in that sense, I don't encounter that problem because these are all folks who are deeply motivated from the perspective of demonstrating to parole boards that they are engaging with a wide variety of sort of rehabilitative programming opportunities inside a prison and are therefore no longer quote a danger to society and should be considered for release. And also because they're actually interested and they want the opportunity to learn these skills that might lead to a good paying job. So in this context, it's always opt-in. Although it brings up an interesting question. So a big conversation in the United States is about teaching programming in schools. And should that be required? Like who has access today and who doesn't? Because there's a privilege gap there, and then also should it be something that everybody is exposed to? And that I think is an interesting question because everybody has to take math, everybody has to take biology, everybody has to take physics. Should everybody have to take a programming class? It's a little bit a question of it gets to the heart of what is the purpose of education and how do you decide what makes the cut for being a requirement for everybody? So I think that's an interesting question, which I have opinions on. I don't need to opine on right here, but it's an interesting question, who should have access to programming education and who should be required to take it. Is an interesting question. Yeah, thank you.
I have a question about where the people who are interested in becoming activists hang out. So in the archiving community, a couple of years ago...
The archiving community.
Yeah, the internet archiving community.
Love that.
Yeah.
Love it.
A couple of years ago, they created something called the archive team, which you probably know about, which is sort of a a distributed task force of people who are interested and who care, but who don't necessarily have the time or resources to volunteer full time. And they just show up every week, and they have one thing that they want to accomplish that week. And then everyone downloads the program, and they spend an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours working on that one thing. And they can accomplish amazing things, like they archived pieces of Tumblr before it went down. They archived a bunch of different things. So my question to you is, for all the people here who are motivated to go out and start joining this community, where do people hang out? Where can they sign up and see what are the things that we need to accomplish, and how can we do it?
So I think it's a really interesting question, and I would love to give a really easy, accessible answer. I think the nature of a lot of the big people systems is that a lot of the dimensions of it are local. And so the answer to the question is necessarily local, and it's dependent on the context of the local community. So what I would say for people interested in contributing to sort of prison reform in California, you hang out with the last mile, and you hang out with some of the nonprofits that have already established some of the infrastructure. Pilot, my company is opening an office in Tennessee, in Nashville, another state in the United States. Much less infrastructure for these types of activities. So I think I might need to invent, if I want Pilot to be engaged with prisons in Tennessee, is that relationship with the local prisons, and then plugging the local Python community into that relationship. And then my answer to the question that you just asked for Nashville would be, well, here we go. We've got the mailing list where people care. But I think the key thing there is a lot of this is local. In a good way, right? Because a lot of this stuff should be very context dependent on what people are experiencing in this specific community. So it's like whatever the local answer is the answer. And don't be afraid of that.
Cool. Maybe as programmers, we can help create those communities.
Yes. Other questions?
Questions, anyone? Okay, I think we have the final question of the day.
Yeah. I'm nervous.
Test. Hello.
Hi, Max, my brother, younger brother, baby brother.
Yes. So I guess I'd like to ask, in terms of projects and whatnot on the horizon for you, what is something that you are either particularly excited about, or an upcoming project that you might be feeling very much looking forward to? And I was curious if there's anything on the horizon in particular.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm not to sound like a broken record over things I just talked about. I'm super hype about at least two things. One is really leveraging Pilot as a platform to demonstrate to other tech companies that it is possible and even like a good idea to. It's like successful outcomes for everybody involved to work with prisons, to provide job training on technical skills, and to actually hire people out of these programs. So not just like talk the talk on it's cool to teach people programming, but like actually have this result in good jobs in good companies afterwards. I mean, it's not a turnkey thing today. It's like Pilot is very much on the forefront of what this could look like, and I'm excited to use the opportunity as an employer to demonstrate that. And I'm super excited about Tennessee. California has one of the more, for all of the flaws of the United States sort of criminal justice system as one big concept, California is a comparatively progressive state. Tennessee is a different ballgame, and I'm excited for the challenge of starting to forge the relationships and the attention to what's going on inside Tennessee prisons and jails and juvenile facilities. So I'm super excited about those things. And then when I talk about this to my friends, I joke about how in 10 years, Pilot will IPO, and then I'll run for the governor of California. And so that might also be, I have that in the back of my head as a thing that I might want to do. And then my retirement project is to run the United States Census, because data is everything.